You know what else is pretty funny? Oh yeah, this is part 2 of this now, and by the way, you might want to go check out part 1 so that segue still makes sense. But you know what else is pretty funny right now, though? How much the Elden Volcano Redux goes out of its way to shoot molten lava directly up my prolapsed asshole for 50 straight minutes. The Silent Realm is surprisingly easy and kind of dull, and it's sad that this is how they basically go out for the rest of the game. I would have loved to at least been pushed a bit harder to navigate more smartly and riskily, but this feels just as easy as the Farron Woods run. The gift being the fire earrings to enter hot areas is also really predictable and lame. It doesn't give you a real new toy to play around with. But before you can enter the temple is when it goes from boring to boiling, as in I get boiling mad. To get past these flame blasters, you need to douse these peculiar frog switches with water, quenching them and turning off the flames. I love these things, they're so weird and creative, but the problem comes with for the third frog switch puzzle, you end up needing to backtrack to Lake Floria to get this big water container from Farron. Scrapper, the stupid robot from earlier, once again follows you through another wondrous filler section where you have to escort them all the way from the bottom of the mountain to the top while protecting them from monsters. This setup is already the worst thing I've ever dealt with in my life, but it gets incredibly frustrating because you have to deal with every enemy. Often to do that they'll make you use the bow, but there's not a lot of arrow drops that appear out of grass or anything in Skyward Sword, so there will be points where the robot will malfunction and it takes like 30 seconds to restart, but the game doesn't give you your freaking arrows back to try again. You're just at a net loss for no fucking reason. Oh my god. Let's just go in the next dungeon. I'm sure that'll be a fine pick-me-up. Whoa, the Fire Sanctuary. Ooh, that is such a neat name. I don't know why, I just really like it. I don't have a whole lot to say about the actual dungeon itself, though. It has a neat look. I like how open it is. It allows the lava and architecture to contrast with a bright blue sky. It's got one of those aesthetics where the indoor and outdoor parts of the dungeon contrast each other that I really like. The parts where you dig underground are really cool, but they don't do anything exceptional with them. They're just used for some parts where they wanted to shove a puzzle into a boring room layout. The water plants are used somewhat creatively. I like that you can stab them to carry them, but I wish they used them more. They don't really do anything exceptional with them. They're just used for some parts where they wanted to shove a puzzle into a boring room layout. Wait, I just said that twice. Dang, I literally have nothing to say. I just be repeating myself. This is another decent dungeon with a decent aesthetic and decent puzzles that has an overall linear layout like all the rest of them. The only great part was the dive into this magical bridge, because I think it's the only time we see an ice-like substance in this whole game. Kinda makes me wish there was an ice region. It looks just as appealing and consumable as the lake. Hey, maybe it's frozen lake water. But other than that, this is so good enough on its own that in terms of this whole game, it's kind of bad enough that I don't like it. It also ends with some disappointing plot beats. Master of Psychology Dr. Girahim tries to get Link to tell him where the second gate of time is, since he learned about it from this ugly color-clashing mural. This scene cements him as a pathetic antagonist because he gives up on trying to learn his information as soon as you beat his boss fight. Sure, he's more difficult than last time, but that's not really saying a lot for Skyward Sword. Then he throws a tantrum and he poofs. The only notable thing about getting the final flame as well is that Fee pops out and just flat out tells Link he now holds the Master Sword. Link doesn't hold it high while the awe-inspiring jingle plays. There's no fanfare of any kind right now. We just move on to the next chapter. New fans are probably going to be confused, like what the hell is a Master Sword? And Zelda veterans will probably immediately realize there's about to be some more bullshit before we get that fanfare. If this is the origin story of the Zelda saga, or whatever I'm supposed to call it, then you better believe Nintendo's making sure we get that epic shot. It's only a matter of time. I'm just worried about what I'm gonna have to go through to get there. Now the game makes Link return to the sealed grounds again. He gets ready to go through the Gate of Time again after having another convo with Groose again. But then the imprisoned shows up, you guessed it, again. This time it has ugly arms and tries to pull itself up ledges, but you can call in the Groosinator to hit it with bombs that keep it from moving. It's a very lackluster and typical fight where you just have to hit its weak points and then hit its other weak point. This is the second time it's shown up, obviously, and both times it's been very blah. So let's talk talk about literally anything else right now, please God. You might be wondering why there's a gadget called the Gruesinator now, and the answer is that Groose got his mojo back and invented it while we were off doing other things because the old lady motivated him. While this is great character development on the face of it, it is weird that it all happened off screen. Groose stays likable, and I like that he's still brash but more humble and willing to do the best he can even if he isn't the hero, and I also like how he calls the old lady Granny. That's cute. It would have been cool to witness these moments of metamorphosis actually happening. We just see Groose before and after in this version of the script. Link could have been more involved by having those choices actually matter for once, or we could have seen some of the moments of growth here, but we didn't, so now I have to complain about it. There's also the issue of Groose becoming the inventor, like he's in fucking WizKids or something. The only evidence we see of this prior to now is maybe him building the wood planks to keep the LOFTWING hold up, but I doubt that was supposed to be foreshadowing. I wish we could have just seen him come up with the idea for the Gruesinator. Maybe he just built a cart to ride around because he was bored and aimless, and then during the fight he realizes he could use it to shoot bombs. Something like that. I think that would be a great way to have Groose's change of heart and change of brains happen at the same time. You know, 2 keys with 1 stone. Did I use that joke already? I don't remember. Let's just say it's one of my many running gags. Anyways, after we get to finally interact with the Gate of Time 6 hours after we got introduced to it. Remember that thing with the harp from last time? We finally get to catch up with Zelda 10 hours after our quest to do so was introduced to us. Here she becomes a more traditional Princess Zelda and shovels every answer to the storyline's biggest mysteries into our mouths. So I'm going to sum it up real quick here for us. Hylia, aka the goddess we've been doing everything for, hid the Triforce in Skyloft to stop a character we haven't seen or heard of before called Demise from getting his hands on it. The imprisoned is what's left of Demise. Because gods apparently can't use the Triforce, Hylia needed a chosen hero to be a human, not a Hylian, that could be strong enough to overcome enough trials to find the Triforce and use it. To give the chosen hero a reason to become unstoppable, she gave up her divine form and became Zelda. So Zelda and Hylia are the same person, and Zelda getting kidnapped and going on her whole quest was made mainly to get Link going on his quest to become that chosen hero. But it was also to help Zelda remember that she was Hylia, and now that she's in the past, she has to seal herself away like a fucking dinosaur to keep Demise locked up. Not that it matters. So basically, the whole start to this Zelda saga is built on a shitty time loop. Nice. Even worse for the game is that going back in time after being teased on it for so long does set up the next portion of the game's story, but it doesn't expand the scope of the game at all. We're locked inside the temple and can't go outside here in the past. This time plot beat did nothing for the story except give us more reasons to revisit the previous areas like a good little bitch. And now that visiting the past doesn't let us explore the surface in a more primordial state or anything, I'm gonna bet we'll have to trek through all those places a 3rd time, won't we? Ugh. It is a cool detail that you can peek through the gate in the present and see Zelda sealed in amber, but the fact that we're doing a time loop again is so lame. It's so lame. It rips off Ocarina of Time, but it does the concept so much worse. In that game, it was a 7-year gap, and you could quickly see the differences between the 2 time periods in a way that raised the stakes. You could actually explore previous areas and see the difference that 7 years made. Here, the time loop in the 2 time periods adds nothing to the story at all. The dialogue is really clunky in this scene because it mostly saps Zelda of all personality as usual. It does have some smart character moments though. The dialogue choices for Link reinforce the strong relationship between the two. She also says that she would always wake Link up when he overslept as they grew up, and now it's his turn. That's a good moment. I also like how Zelda's character is somewhat maintained. Somewhat, by having her struggling to remember that she's Hylia now versus having lived as Zelda this whole time. At that point though, if your characters are having a hard time keeping up with your big twist, is it even really worth it in the first place? I mean, come on. You know, did Tetsuya Nomura work on this game? Alright, give me my fucking Reddit karma. While she's at it giving us a 6-for-1 deal at the Zelda Lore one-stop shop, Hylia also officially turns our sword into the Master Sword, with the jingle and everything. So I was right. We did have to sit through some crap to get the Master Sword, and now everything that matters in Zelda has been explained. Yippee! Yes. Well, mostly. But Nintendo committing to a definitive chronology for one of its most intentionally episodic series was a big deal at the time. In 2011, for the original release, I want to clarify, because they don't care anymore. Fans had always been theorizing about possible timeline placements since the dawn of the internet, basically. Nintendo obviously didn't make any real effort building up a solid continuity. Stories were never the forefront of making Zelda for them. A new game would only be a direct sequel if it helped the premise out, really. But then when Skyward Sword came out, they decided to change that and implement the official Zelda timeline, placing Skyward Sword at the beginning as a prequel to all the previous games across the last 25 years, and then setting up a system whereby every subsequent game would be placed into the existing timeline. Are you with me? Probably already lost you in the whole time loop paragraph, who am I kidding? Now, I feel like the timeline isn't too difficult to understand personally, but maybe that's because it's existed for over a decade, so I've gotten so used to it that at this point I just get it. For newcomers, it's probably really convoluted, but I wanted to get a sense for just how convoluted it is for them. So I sat down with my friends Kyle and Meredith in an attempt to explain as much Zelda lore as I could to them.
The whitest Mexican you ever seen.
Facts.
It is true, I'm whitewashed. I was just testing the microphone, that's all I was doing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the timeline part of the video. Kyle,
Hi.
what the fuck do you know about the Legend of Zelda video game series?
I only know probably Breath of the Wild. What's the one that was for the Wii? The one with the wolf?
Twilight Princess?
I played a little bit of that one, so that's probably about it.
Okay, Meredith. Have you ever heard of The Legend of Zelda?
No, I just think it sounds like Sonic.
That's
Correct.
actually, no, you're completely right, actually.
No way.
They're in the same universe.
Yeah.
No way.
Smash Ball.
No, I'm literally a gamer.
There's also, for Sonic Lost World on the Wii U, there was DLC where he was dressed as a Link. But, so in 2011, The Legend of Zelda turned 25 years old.
Its prefrontal cortex was finally developed.
It fucking fused. So they made an official timeline. They had refused to do that to this point, but they said, guys, actually, we decided, no, we're gonna make a timeline so then when we make other games, then we can put them into the same timeline.
So before that, I was just wishy-washy.
Before that, people were like, maybe this goes here and this,
Yeah.
But Nintendo didn't say anything, but now they're like, guys, here it is. Yeah, so they made this.
Damn.
They made this book.
The Bible.
It's called the Bible. It's called Hyrule Historia. You can find it in every hotel room.
I think this is the only
Not the
Bible
hotel
I'll actually
room.
read, to be honest.
You wouldn't read this?
No, so this is the only one I would.
So here's what it says. A chronology of Hyrule, land of the gods. Okay. The history of the cycle of rebirth and the Triforce. Okay.
I understood like half of those words.
If you touch it, you can make a wish, which is why Ganondorf's always trying to get all 3 triangles.
That's awesome.
But we'll get into
I
that
wish
later.
For a Pop-Tart.
Yeah, you
That's what I
would
wish.
use the
I'd
whole
wish-
fucking Triforce to
wish
get a
for a
Pop-Tart.
Pop-Tart.
Okay, but what kind of Pop-Tart at least?
Unfrosted.
Strawberry.
They say, this is an introduction to the history of Hyrule told chronologically, which weaves together the numerous Legend of Zelda stories. Is it a legend? Is it an accurate history of a cycle of rebirth?
This is based on a true story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
What
Girls.
the fuck are you talking
I'm
about?
just joking.
There is evidence that the story of the Legend of Zelda begins with Skyward Sword.
How is there evidence?
I don't fucking know, man. Up to this point, the Legends of Zelda, no italics, just Zelda is italicized, have been surrounded by myth and mystery, but now, with the help of the following information, you will be able to discover for yourself the real history of Hyrule.
Wow.
I feel empowered.
Stories not included here. Link's crossbow training, which just fucking breaks the whole thing, really. And it's called BS: The Legend of Zelda, and I'm not even
funny.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna begin. That's a whole nother can of worms that I
That
can't
is a
explain
can
to
of
you.
worms. Okay, so wait, those are 2 games that they just don't have a home in the timeline.
In the timeline, they don't fucking count.
Poor Rettenly.
There's a timeline for Zelda. Let's talk about that. Skyward Sword, which that's the game that this video is about. Can you fucking believe that, Kyle?
This video is about that one?
Did you watch part 1? You were in it.
Was that a part 1? I thought it was the entire thing.
We're in part 2 right now.
God damn.
Isn't that crazy?
It
This
is
is
crazy.
a
Holy
can of
shit.
worms and a half.
Yeah, but so Skyward Sword basically Yeah, so that's Demise, but Link kills him because
shit.
he's the final boss and you have to
that's
win.
right.
But then Demise is all like, you beat me and I fucking hate that. So now all you, me, and Zelda's bloodlines are fused forever because I'm cursing you.
Jeez.
So basically this cycle of suffering just keeps repeating over and over again.
Dude.
Then the island comes back down to the surface because Demise is dead, which is where Hyrule comes from because now everybody's on the ground. And then they take the Triforce and they're like, man, I don't want nobody to have this. So they put it into another dimension called the Sacred Realm, but people kept fighting over it. So basically the Triforce fades into legend because enough time has passed, and they put it in the Temple of Time. We get to the Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap, which is basically so if you've ever played Zelda, if you ever need like little pickups, like little hearts, if you need extra help, you can walk up to grass and like chop it with your sword and you'll get shit out of it. And the canon explanation is that these little microscopic fuckers called the Picori are living in the grass.
Not the Pikmin.
Literally what I've been
Pikmin.
saying.
How
But-
cute. They're like little garden gnomes.
There is this guy named Vati, and he's a wind wizard, and
Looks
he
pretty
shows
dope.
up to a Ren fair that they're holding. There's a magic sword in this like box thing, and he walks up and he uses his wind magic to just cut it in half and cause conflict, and he turns Princess Zelda to stone. So then Link has to go find the 4 elements to make a new sword. He meets this little
Angry Bird.
He's
Boomerang
pissed
one?
off, yeah. So this guy is actually Link's hat in the game because that's the form that he's
Aw.
cursed to take. So technically this game is supposed to be the origin story of Link's hat,
Okay.
but
Wait, what?
Link already had the green hat in Skyward Sword because they don't care about the
They
timeline.
really didn't think that one through.
Exactly. But on the plus side, Zelda's adorable in this game.
Aw, little fairy girl.
Throughout going on his quest to cooperate with the tiny people, he gets the 4 elements and they forge a new sword. It's called the 4 Sword. Do you
What
have any
kind of name is that?
Well, why do you think it's called the 4 Sword, Kyle?
Because it
it
has
says-
4 edges.
You're very close.
Because it's 4 inches.
Just like Kyle, am I right? She.
Waiting for the small guys.
What?
Continue.
Because you can make 4 copies of yourself using the sword. So then Link goes and kicks Vadi's ass, and then Vadi's dead, and he's sealed up with the 4 Sword. Later on, the 4 Sword seal breaks, Vadi comes back, and then there's like a whole nother game where the 4 Links you can play with your friends, and this game doesn't matter.
They're really just about to just like pull up and just jump this motherfucker.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
so sad. Look at him. He's already in defeat.
He's
No,
nice.
there is no need for a bomb for this. What is
For this
going
tiny
on?
little
That is
guy.
overkill.
What that mouth do though?
On God.
Sheesh. It spits rocks, actually. You got mad kidney stone
Damn,
problems.
not the
Damn.
kidney stone.
So they take the 4 Sword and they beat the shit out of Vadi again, and then Vadi's
Is
like...
that Vadi?
Yeah, that's his like corrupted
Looks
like
weird.
demon form with the big hittable eyeball for an obvious weak point in this
yeah.
Nintendo game. They don't actually care about that game because they never re-release it. But now this is where things actually fucking matter. Because of the Sacred Realm shit that I was telling you about, people started thinking maybe I should like go get that shit, and there was a big ass civil war. So people were fucking dying left and right because of, you know, some lady takes her little kid and she goes all the way to like the west or whatever of Hyrule. She puts her baby boy in Kokiri Forest and then just dies.
The mom dies?
Yeah, then the mom dies.
That's foul.
Guess who that baby was, Kyle Diaz?
Link?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the game starts out in Kokiri Forest. So I'm gonna send you back in time to be a kid again, and you get to actually just like go live out the 7 years you lost.
Sounds like the company's running out of ideas, so they have to start over.
You think?
No.
Here's where things get crazy. So because she does that, she has created 2 timelines that are both completely separated from each other.
Oh,
We're hitting the multiverse.
Yeah, this is the multiverses of madness.
Oh my God.
that's nice.
And there is, so now there is the adult timeline, and then there's the child timeline, both of which go in different directions.
That's cool. I like
However, fuck you, because
Okay.
theoretically, if Link dies anywhere on this journey,
Right.
there is a 3rd timeline called the Heroes Falls timeline.
Dude.
It's not real.
Dude.
But we're gonna talk about it anyway. So this is the Hero Falls timeline. So basically Ganondorf wins. They went to war with Ganon, and without Link's help they ended up sealing him away again. This guy's like, you know what, I actually like Ganon. So he started taking like the daughters of the sages and he started sacrificing them so he could make a portal into the Sacred Realm.
Goddamn.
And so Link has to go save Zelda. And he has to
Wait.
find a way to get into the Sacred Realm.
So how is Link still alive then if he died?
It's a different Link.
Oh,
It's It's a different Link.
Gotcha.
Sealed up Ganondorf turned the Sacred Realm into this dark, terrible world that mirrors Hyrule. In this game, there's just 2 worlds. And then Link does the same, save the sages, and then he goes and fucking stabs Ganondorf again. And then he seals the Master Sword up again. And then this same Link stars on like a billion other games, including the Oracle games, which are like, they made a Zelda game that's like Pokemon where you have to get like 2 different versions. But then if you beat both games, you can combine them. And that's when the actual final boss is the Twin Rova, those evil witches. They go and resurrect Ganondorf again, and then Link kills Ganondorf again. This version of Link goes and sails around the world, but he gets hit by lightning and he wakes up on this island, and he's exploring the island because the only way you can get off the island is quote unquote to wake the windfish. But then the big plot twist is if he wakes the windfish, then the island won't exist anymore because the island is inside of the windfish's dream. But Link has to do it because otherwise in the real world he'll drown. So he ends up destroying this island, and the only way that it still exists is because Link remembers his adventure. Yeah, so then after that, Hyrule was all Gucci in the coochie. But then I think they make up some shit about like some prince like wanting to like take the throne, and so he like seals Zelda up. He puts a curse on Zelda the first, and she's asleep. But then the actual Zelda 1 happens, and so Link just needs to go and like do shit. And then after that, the same version of Link gets told about the sleeping Zelda 1, and so then the second game that he's in, he has to go wake her up and also stop Ganon from returning because whatever. So basically in this timeline it sucks dick because Ganon just keeps coming back faster and faster.
Like it, yeah.
So this is where we get to the child timeline, because that version of Link already knew like what was gonna happen in the 7 years. He went right back to Zelda and he's like, I already lived through this. They arrest Ganon. Ganondorf is dead in this timeline, but actually not really, because then they put the sequel to 4 Swords at the end of this timeline. The story with this one is that Ganon and Vati team up. 4 Links go on an epic multiplayer adventure. That's what I said. Who cares? That's the end of that timeline. After Zelda sends Link back to relive his childhood, she's still there, and so things are okay for a while.
Kyle be gone.
Kyle's obsessed with this book. So Kyle Diaz, King Diaz, no Hansen Kyle.
Jesus.
He died, and he's obsessed with like the ancient kingdom of Hyrule. So this bitch right here, she's a pirate captain named Tetra, but that's actually Zelda, which everybody.
Oh my god.
You stab him in the actual like forehead to stone.
In the foreskin.
Yeah, in the foreskin, and he becomes the new pedestal for the Master Sword like forever because the ocean crashes down and destroys Hyrule. And so the king is like, go find your own land, which is a good ending for that game. Then they made Phantom Hourglass for the Nintendo DS, where Link has to go rescue Tetra again. That one doesn't really matter so much because they're sailing at the beginning, they take a little detour, and then they're still sailing at the end. So they're looking for a new land. Then they find it, and they call it New Hyrule, which is...
That's so smart.
Which is kind of stupid. I kind of don't like it.
What would you name it?
I would call it Subscribe to Izzy-Doodle. That's what I would call it.
Hey, yo.
So they get to this new land, but there's already some shit going on there. There's a demon called Maladus, but he's tied down by these magic train tracks. So they make a new land and they make trains to go on the train tracks. But then 100 years later, this guy, the new version of Link, wants to be an engineer.
Of course he does.
He wants to move on from the...
Well, this is like a new little kid. Like this.
Okay.
So they find the land, and then like 100 years later, this game.
100 years, okay.
So now everybody's like, oh, we just use trains. We don't know why. Lol. So he goes to meet Zelda and become ordained as a fucking engineer.
What the?
But then this fucker named Chancellor Cole is like a 2-timer, and he's like, I'm gonna kill Zelda and use her body to like put Maladus in it and bring back the Demon King. So then Link and Zelda's ghost, which she can possess suits of armor, they have to go meet all the magic guys and restore the rails to hold Maladus down, and then they end up killing him. Buy Nintendo products.
Oh, nice.
That's what's on this page.
Playing cards.
What did you get away from that, Kyle?
Link is just many people.
Yeah?
We're all Links.
In our own way.
Exactly.
As a person that doesn't know like fucking shit about Zelda, did that make any sense to you?
No, yeah, in a way.
Yeah,
In a way.
think
I mean, like, I
look over it
learned
a couple
more.
more times.
Sure.
Well,
Would
yeah.
you say that it like actually connects together in a way that like makes any real sense, or do you think that they just kind of hashed it?
As a familiar Zelda fan, do you think that?
Oh no, I hate the timeline. It's stupid.
Okay.
But what do you... No, I'm asking like you guys that don't know anything.
I mean, I like a timeline, but that's just because I have OCD.
Fair, valid. Did you like the multiple branches? Did you like that?
No.
I thought it was cool.
I like how they try to do it, but
Yeah.
they're all kind of different.
I like the idea.
Yeah, you like the idea?
Again, I just need to look over the details again to know if I actually like the details.
Sure, I get you.
I think Ganondorf should just win. Just let him win.
You just want Ganondorf to win?
Yeah, just let him win.
Damn.
It'd be so much peaceful. We wouldn't have so many timelines if Ganondorf just won.
That's true.
I'm just saying.
That's actually such a good take.
The entire game.
Let the villain win for once. How about that?
Damn, Kyle. Kyle's coming in with the hot takes for real.
Kyle's a literal philosopher.
Kyle, do you have any words of wisdom you want to leave our audience with? Yeah, this is an overly complicated way to join all these games together, even coming from someone who knows its ins and outs by heart. I have a lot of issues with it too, like going back to the Minish Cap again for the first time in this second part, but like the fourth or fifth time in this whole fucking thing. Basically gives an origin story for Link's hat, that's like the whole premise of the game, but Skyward Sword makes it a part of the Knight's uniform with Link just happening to get the color green. Okay. The Link loses timeline is the biggest cop-out imaginable despite at first glance being a creative idea. They just cram all the games that they couldn't be bothered to create an actual connected history for into that branch, while the other branches are lacking in games because of this. As silly as it would have been to put like a Link to the Past before the Wind Waker or some shit, I would be more than okay with that instead of there just being fucking Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess, both followed up by fucking Four Swords Adventures. Like I said at the start of this section, Zelda from a storytelling perspective is mostly episodic. I really doubt that outside of this game that philosophy was intended to change ever. So the games themselves don't really benefit from this timeline thing anyway. Plus in the long run it didn't benefit the series really. In Breath of the Wild they said it's so far in the future that whichever timeline it's put in wouldn't matter. Aonuma put references to all three branches in the story, so now you've got people theorizing that Breath of the Wild is actually a timeline merge, and that's just ridiculous. 6 years after setting up the timeline, Nintendo basically totally abandoned it. It makes discourse on the series a good time for nobody except for Zelda lore YouTubers. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Zelda timeline. Let's get back to the actual video game this video was about. To search for the Triforce, first we have to go and hunt for the ancient spirit of genes, LEVIAS. Before we go deal with him, we get to learn a more advanced technique for the bird called the Balderdash or something, I forgot. It just replaces the dash and the bird doesn't have any other upgrades, which is shit, frankly. Plus, this makes Link a major chode because this is an actual attack he can perform while flying now. What kind of jerk would fly like that? Dude, this corkscrew dash kicks ass, and I can watch Madagascar while I'm flying. What kind of music do you like, Gloria? Diggo hop! Woohoo! Yeah, baby! That really fucking hurt my throat, I'm not even gonna lie. Now that we have that skill down, we can go into the Thunderhead and meet LEVIAS. Unfortunately, he's a little bit possessed at the moment, which is pretty embarrassing, so we have to fight him. Considering how animalistic it is, it's weird that he only appears now when we offer him pumpkin soup, instead of him always being around and now we have like a new item or something that lets us take him on. It's one of those things that shows how lacking the script and world presentation is in this game, because it sort of makes it seem like Link is the only force that changes anything in the world. I know this is true in every other Zelda story, but in most cases Link was presented with a situation where something was clearly wrong before he got there, and he had to put it right. All four of the previous games we've looked at in this retrospective have excelled at this narrative formula. Here, everything stays the same until Link crosses a checkpoint. The first phase of the boss fight sees you using your new dash to squeeze the jelly out of these eyes. It's really obnoxious. I keep trying to be more precise with the wonky flying mechanics, but they're really made for situations with lots of open space, so this really doesn't feel great. Normally with stupid gimmick fights like this in games, I'll just tank a bunch of damage and get it over with as quickly as I possibly can, but nope. I actually had to try, because when you bonk this guy, the game spins you around and spits you out in the opposite direction. This boss fight kind of assumes I give a shit about flying on the bird, but frankly the only thing I care about is how much tipping my wrist makes my carpal tunnel flare up. Ditto writing this script, ditto holding this microphone right now actually too. The second half of the fight is on Levias's back, where we fight the giant worm that's controlling him. You need to use your sword to bat their, I don't know, pellets, I guess, back at them in one of three distinct directions. Ooh, which one's it gonna be? After dealing with that, Levias then explains that to find the Triforce, we must go to this place called, hopefully I pronounced this right, the previous 3 major locations so that we can learn parts of a song that will show us the way to the Triforce. So yeah, we get to go back to all those places a 3rd time for the biggest fucking fetch quest. I freaking knew it. And would you believe me if I told you that all 3 revisits splinter into smaller fetch quests in and of themselves? Call me the title of Dorkax's review of Dead Rising 4, because what a way to go. I took fairly detailed notes of my emotions during each revisit, and one of the most common feelings I wrote down was that each mini quest kind of piled on some more fatigue. Each section has a good concept going for it, but revisiting these areas is already such a big issue, and each mini quest has a bunch of self-contained problems in and of themselves. Farron's revisit actually features a 3rd fucking fight with the fucking motherfucking imprisoned my fuckhole. This time the bastard can levitate and can only be stopped by getting hit with the Grucinator. However, in the last phase, Gruce's bombs get blocked off, so you have to rush up to the top and get tossed onto his head to hit the spire from there. It's decently pulse pounding, and I actually enjoy that idea. I feel like people say this a lot, but if all the imprisoned fights were squeezed into one big fight with all these evolutions and complications, it would probably feel a lot more exciting. Instead of being frowned upon as one of the worst set pieces in the series, it would have at least been remembered as one of the cooler fights in Skyward Sword. Also, it needs a fucking redesign because it looks like a pile of leeches. It's gotta be one of the worst designs in the entire series, so this whole thing is like in the D tier of all Zelda things. After that, we get launched into the woods once more. However, this time they're flooded because Farron was trying to stop the monster infestation once and for all. She decides to be the biggest cunt of all time and make us swim around the woods and collect these things called tad tones to learn her part of the song. This quest is whatever. It has big problems, but conceptually I don't really mind it. As usual, the water be looking nummy. I want all the electrolytes. But I also love the serene atmosphere the new music added. It makes the trial more relaxing than it otherwise would be. Plus, there's definitely some novelty to swimming around these environments we've previously had to trek about on foot. Predictably though, the swimming controls get a bit annoying after a while, and it feels really stupid to only let Link douse for tad tones 2/3 of the way through. It's not a good time, let me tell ya. By the end, I was so excited to leave. Fatigue. Lanayru once again proves itself as the best region by having a new area be discovered. It's also definitely the shortest mini quest, which is appreciated. This section is basically yet another decent 3D Mario level, but I was still feeling burnt out by this point, especially because it ends up breaking the story. To help this giant Pikachu get the Master Kush, you need to plant a seed in the past and then bring the fruit into the present. For starters, if this thing stays a seed in the past, then it would be impossible for the Thunder Dragon to ever get the grown fruit because it would just transform every time it passes the literal timeline. Second of all, this creates a non-guaranteed time loop thingy where the fruit only exists because Link created it in the past. This totally doesn't gel with the guaranteed time loop of Zelda being sealed in the past. But to be honest, the only reason this matters way more than it did in Ocarina of Time is because this game puts way more weight on its story. When you want people to care more about the details of your narrative instead of just the basic framework, they're gonna notice the big problems your story has even more. And every Zelda story has big issues, but they're less noticeable because those games just want to use their stories to nudge you in a specific direction instead of sticking you on a more focused and shaky roller coaster ride. TLDL, Skyward Sword's narrative is more stupid than previous games and can't prop itself up with much else. Fatigue. Elden's revisit gives us our once-a-game stealth section. Here we need to get our items back one at a time without getting caught. Some of the smaller stealth parts are fun-ish and clever-ish, but this is still Elden Volcano. It was already tedious to maneuver up before, but now it has an even more linear and specific path to get to the top, which makes it even more tedious. And even though Fee's gone for most of this part because you don't have your sword, the game still manages to hold your hand by having this magma explain everything to you again, and by having these big sweeping camera pans that basically show you exactly what to do. Fatigue. Even though each of these sections comprise at least an hour or so of gameplay each, I managed to only have a paragraph or two to say about each of them. This section is the most blatant negative padding I've probably experienced in the series, which I could say for the middle third of the game as well. At least the Triforce Hunt and Twilight sections had you experiencing major new content at almost every turn by virtue of how they were placed. This is just bullshit to me. LEVIAS gives us the last part of the song, and it turns out the Song of the Hero is actually the main Legend of Zelda theme. I've always thought of this motif as kind of being Link's recurring theme, like how Zelda and Ganon have theirs. So this is actually pretty cool to introduce in-universe as a diegetic piece of music for the first time. But where's the transition? I can't hold this up. It still shows how lacking this game's soundtrack on the whole is. I complained about that a little last time, but overall I still do enjoy a majority of Twilight Princess's OST. Here, because of the orchestrated sound, most of the major themes just kind of mush together, and a lot of tracks that manage to stick out do so because they kind of annoy me. I straight up do not like the music that plays in the sky, which makes it the only Zelda overworld theme that I will say that about. All the songs I feel more strongly towards I've already mentioned earlier, so while this score has its highlights, I'm not a huge fan of Skyward Sword's music direction. But just because that overall direction was mishandled doesn't mean that some all-time classics didn't end up in the mix. I really like the SKYLOFT music, all the variations of the Bizarre music, Bruce's theme and Fee's theme, Farron Woods, the desert tracks, both of them, the Sand Sea music, Galactus's battle track, Yurahim's theme and all the battle variations of it, the Farron Woods Under the Water variation, and you know what? To give the sky some credit musically, the island theme and specifically the theme of the Isle of Songs are great too. There's also the more obscure tracks that I've mentioned that I really enjoy. The Wing Ceremony theme is great. A lot of cues at the start like leaping off the ledge, and then the Tadtone's Trial. I think Farron Woods' Silent Realm is the best of the three, and surprisingly I love pretty much all the dungeon themes that aren't the mining facility. They really emphasize the more active and physical dungeons here, and even though I hate them, Scrapper's theme is also a bop. So even though I don't think this soundtrack is that great and I barely ever listen to it on my own time, there are quite a few songs I really enjoy, and there are still a couple that I'll save for when I discuss the final stretch. The most unfortunate thing about it is that it really shows both the pitfalls and potential of a fully orchestrated Zelda score. They'd figured this out a lot better in the next few entries, but it's so sad to me how much I don't like Skyward Sword's OST overall. The Zelda 25th anniversary concert also happened around this time as well, and I think it demonstrates how great Zelda music performed live can sound, even if it's all old melodies. I'm feeling a mid to life 5 on this one. Also, yeah, I couldn't think of anywhere else to mention the symphony, but I did want to mention it somewhere. Now that Link's learned the full song of the hero, we gotta use it to open up a new silent realm in the sky of all things. That's a fine twist, I don't have a problem with it, but Fee says it's somewhere on these sky isles. That's the stupidest thing she said in this entire game, bar none, because obviously the gate's gonna be on SKYLOFT. Where else would it be? Pumpkintopia? The sky is the worst overworld in the entire main Zelda series, and even if you disagree, would you really say it's one of the best? Even the weaker ones at least feel like you're crossing a connected world with some stuff to do. The sky literally just serves as a massive and boring level select menu. You can land on a rock to open a chest, you can go to SKYLOFT or one of the few little islands for some mini games, which are mildly interesting at best, although the bamboo cutting one does have some pretty good music. Basically, it tries to do the island concept from Wind Waker over again, but completely ruins the idea. They say that the concept for Breath of the Wild came from players of this game wanting to see how the areas below the clouds from Skyward Sword connected, and I think that in the context of Skyward Sword itself, that's a big missed opportunity for sure too, mostly because I hate spending any time above the clouds, unless I'm in SKYLOFT. As it is, the sky is a massive failure. It looks like the sequel to Breath of the Wild is redoing... Oh my god, that's how long this script took to write. I put the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Oh, whatever. It looks like Tears of the Kingdom is redoing the general idea of both exploring the ground and the sky, and it'll probably do it a teensy bit better, at least. But when this game popped out in 2011, we hit a point where things definitely needed to change because this game's scope was way too limited in a way that even most general consumers were not hot on. Skyward Sword Overworld Rant complete! The final Silent Realm in SKYLOFT is the best out of the 4 of them. SKYLOFT is more compact than any of the major areas, which makes sneaking around or running for your life much more risky and tense. I really enjoyed my time scampering around and getting the tears here. It actually kind of had my heart pounding. Either that or I had too much coffee. It's kind of my little tradition to go out for coffee and then sit down and focus whenever I'm planning on having a little gaming session with myself, but I unfortunately most likely overdid it a little bit with this playthrough. Oopsie. After the Silent Realm, we immediately open the way to the final dungeon, which has this spiral architecture that isn't reflected in the actual place at all, but it does serve a story purpose. However, I might be wrong about this, but I do also think it's a reference to an early concept for SKYLOFT's layout, which I find very cool. The dungeon being revealed causes a big earthquake and nobody reacts to it. This is another one of those things where Skyward Sword's story is weaker because the story itself is given more importance. I would have loved to have the whole island of SKYLOFT play a role in Link's journey somehow, since the whole community would be more closely knit, or at least show them reacting to the crazy island-altering shenanigans Link is causing, you know? Even if they don't care about a dungeon showing up, they should probably care a little bit about the whole chunk with the goddess statue falling afterwards, especially because Link is literally on it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Also, this is super nitpicky, but I wish these hanging targets teetered more when Link connected with them. Give their animation some wobbly weight, because Link just hitting them and immediately hanging down looks so lifeless. It's not game breaking though, the game does enough of that on its own. I will say that I think it's so cool how Link has been trepidatious with all the dungeons in this game, but now that it's time for him to prove himself as the hero, he charges with full courage into the dungeon. That's really cool, and this dungeon obviously has a lot of hype to pay off as the final dungeon in the game. Oh hell yeah, brother. Finally a dungeon I can actually go off about. Unlike most dungeons in the series, where you're working towards one end goal, that being a boss, here you're put in the middle of the biggest puzzle box the game has to offer. Your end goal here is to retrieve the 3 parts of the Triforce, and to try and get to them, you have to use these slide puzzle tables to rearrange the rooms in the dungeon. This idea is genius and actually creates a scenario where the entire dungeon connects up in a really dynamic and interesting way, instead of just being split into parts like the other ones. Each individual room doesn't slouch either. I mean, the first one does, but that's the entrance and it needs to be a chill way to teach you about the slide puzzle, so it gets a pass. And while I could critique this dungeon for just being a Skyward Sword's funniest moments compilation part 69, having the final dungeon be a mashup of the others is a staple at this point in the retrospective, so I'm okay with it. It takes the time to reuse every major gimmick or interactable object that the game has shown to you, and I'm not kidding, I'm pretty sure it is literally every single one of them, and it even puts them to work in creative new ways. All your items see use, pretty much every dungeon aesthetic makes a cameo, and it helps you know what you kind of need to do to get started or maneuver around without compromising on more complex puzzles or obstacles. To top it off, this is definitely the most difficult dungeon in the whole game too. The robot mid-boss from the sand ship is back and just as difficult, and a lot of the puzzles stopped me in my tracks for a good few minutes. I've definitely gotten soft by this point in the retrospective because Skyward Sword isn't really all that difficult, much like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. So I was a tad frustrated at the dungeon at first when I realized it was going to start clobbering me in the face, but then I remembered how difficult Ocarina of Time was by the end, so I learned to really savor that here. Honestly, I'm glad the game finally really challenged me, even if it probably would have been better to rebalance the game to make sure it had a more steady difficulty curve instead of a mild spike at the end. But that spike is very mild, because even at its toughest, the dungeon felt pretty fair. And even if it's kicking your butt, getting one of the Triforce pieces refills all your hearts, so it works out perfectly IMO. Speaking of the Triforce, this dungeon really commits to the bit of not having any underwhelming fat and ends without a boss. Instead, you're immediately rewarded with completion upon getting the 3 pieces of the Triforce. Say it with me, everybody. Power, wisdom, and courage. This part is really cool if you've been playing the series for a while, because it always seems like Link does all the work of restoring or finding the Triforce, but he very rarely actually gets to use it. It's always some other character. So it's a neat payoff for the series that Link actually gets to wish for something. Like I said before the dungeon, Link wishes for Demise to be totally vanquished, which causes the relatively little Isle of the Goddess to fall down and perfectly squeeze into the Sacred Ground spiral, squishing and destroying Demise forever. Link and Groose and Granny surprisingly aren't celebrating. They just stand and nod like 5 times, which is really weird. Then the door at the back of the temple opens like we're watching a Broadway production of Spider-Man or something. And then Zelda's back! Everyone just starts like awkwardly, slowly, happily celebrating. I get this is the drawn out kind of soppy because this is supposed to be a fake out happy ending before the final stretch, but this slows down the pace to the point that even as a fake out, it feels completely off. Zelda gets knocked to the floor by Girahim, who pops out from behind a pillar like we're watching a high school production of fucking Robin Hood or something. The way this scene of him picking up Zelda and heading back in time to truly resurrect Demise in the past is, and I mean this from a filmmaking perspective, not as a video game because I know they're completely different, but the cuts and choreography are staged in a way that this is supposed to make this a super intense fight scene where Girahim takes everyone out and he heads through the portal, but that barely happens and it feels like nobody gives a shit about going into the final encounter. In fact, this isn't even a point of no return because most Zelda games don't even really have that. Before you start any of the final bosses, you can go get jacked. In fact, before you start the final boss, you can go get this like invincibility potion that you can get from catching bugs, which is what I did on my first playthrough because I sucked. Back in the past, Girahim has already started a ceremony to revive Demise, and to stall Link, he puts this wall around the spiral and then sends 1,000,003 bokoblins for us to mow down. The Horde fight is set up well and has one of the best tracks in the game, which is called Kumite, playing behind it. It has 3 distinct parts that play to add to the tension, and I think it sets the scene well. There's the normal variation, a more intense version with ramped up percussion and brass, a version with Girahim's leitmotif mixed in. Now let's listen to how the intro cutscene for the Horde uses all of these variations to drive the tension and put you in Link's righteously angry shoes. Excellently done scene. The fight itself is underwhelming though. First of all, Link swinging his sword stops him from moving, so it doesn't feel like you're cutting through. It feels like you're pushing people out of the way at Comic-Con. The other major problem is that this giant horde of beasts isn't neat to look at. We've been fighting bokoblins from the very first area of the game until the very end, and it's really boring. To be fair, that's a problem with the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess as well, but Skyward Sword especially has had an issue with a lack of enemy variety. The concept and presentation really have to carry this fight. Once we plow our way to the center, Girahim puts his ceremony on hold, he says. He's tired of us getting in his way and gets really mad. But like, us getting here was his fault because he let us go literally 3 other times. A cool bit of visual lore is that Girahim explicitly shows us that he himself is a sword, and his new design has very clear parallels to Fi's. I'll get back to that, but for now we need to whoop his ass. And boy, this final Girahim battle is fucking sick. It whooped my butt a shit ton, but it was fun every single time I tried. I prefer the first phase where you have to knock him off the edge, but he'll do a fake out attack that can flip your positions. It's not hard, but it has this frantic energy, and continually knocking him further and further down the spiral feels so exciting. The second phase is just a more difficult sword duel. You have to spin attack or parry him, but I didn't have a shield, to get his sword away and then stab at his chest, and then he gets a big sword that you need to totally bust up. It doesn't feel nearly as angry or desperate as the first phase where you were both trading blows and trying to knock each other off quickly. Girahim needed more Zant energy here, where he's really going after you because he drops his gentleman act. After beating him, he reveals that actually the ceremony was still happening the whole time. And you know, that's amazing writing. I love when a game straight up lies to get us from point A to B, because how else would we have a final boss, you know? It's really just like jaw-droppingly amazing what Nintendo's accomplished here. The imprisoned sucks Zelda's golden juice and becomes more humanoid, revealing the Demon King demise. Also, Girahim turns into his giant sword that's very clearly a sort of anti-master sword. So basically, Link and Fi are good and Demise and Girahim are bad. It's not really thematically deep, but it is cool from a design perspective. But at least it's not pretending to be thematically deep, like how when Demise gives this little spiel about how surprising it is that Link is standing up to him because humans are cowards, but Link is courageous. Do you get it? This is the origin story of the Legend of Zelda, guys. We have to have a beat about Link having the courage because the Triforce. You would think Demise wouldn't care and would use his Demon King powers to blow the spiral up or summon a demon army or something, but since Link keeps standing there, he decides to make a portal to a little pocket world to fight Link. And gosh, the more I think about how powerful Demise should literally have been, the lamer the final boss fight gets. Why is everybody insisting on doing this proper duel shit? It's the only way Link has a realistic chance. Turn this into a Michael Bay movie and blow the universe to high heavens and it would actually be more investing. He doesn't use cool magic or anything during the fight either. He just blocks your attacks and does 2 kinds of sword swings. Sure, he can do a Skyward Strike using lightning, but Link can too. So in terms of ability, Demise is probably the lamest final boss we've looked at. He doesn't do any crazy shit. You know, earlier when I talked about bosses I tank through because I don't really care? Yeah, this is one of them. It's basically just the Ganondorf fight from TP, but he attacks you less and blocks more. Plus, that game had a bunch of other huge fights to up the ante beforehand at least, so by that point the more intimate mano-a-mano stuff felt more like a big deal for real. Presentation-wise, the room full of water and the crazy colors reminds me of the Ganondorf fight from Wind Waker 2. For being the penultimate moment of the game, the final boss is way too easy for all the build-up demise is gotten, but it is cool to do another stab in the body as a final blow. I don't think that'll ever not be cool. After Demise dies, Link puts the Master Sword in its iconic pedestal, but not before Fi comes out and says she felt happiness traveling with Link. We've all seen this trope of a robot being like, is this happy? Is this what jerking off feels like? Thing is though, it only works when I give a shit. Fi was like a naggy babysitter for the whole game by design with no personality by design. So this is the most forced and manipulative shit in the world. Supposedly now in every other game she's still inside the Master Sword, which, okay. And is this like I dream of Genie? What does living inside the sword even mean? Like, what? I don't care. The goodbye between Zelda and Impa is super forced and manipulative too. Link and Impa don't like each other, remember? And we do get to see some of Zelda's adventures for a little bit in the credits, but that doesn't mean I have any care for Impa, because she was a bitch to my face, and that's what they choose to end the game on. Holy balls, that sucks. There is a post-credit scene where Zelda says, I want to live on the surface, so the game can be like, see, that's where Hyrule came from. Now everything is explained and the whole timeline makes sense. Whoa. Yeah, great to know our priorities are in place. You know what? That's mean. If this was still 2011. Oh, that scared me. Oh, sorry, let's try that again. If this was closer to 2011, I think I'd be a lot nicer to Skyward Sword's approach, but the thing is, as time has gone on, that approach has only gotten more and more arbitrary. You can tell they made a motion control Zelda game because they felt like they had to, and they probably felt pressured into making the 25th anniversary an event somehow, and everyone decided on the big official timeline. I get the feeling they never want to make another game like Skyward Sword ever again. That's why they course corrected so hard right after. Even as a player, the prequel story basis makes this a game you kind of have to engage out of pure unbridled obligation in order to get into the series. And that's a shame because both the game part and story part of Skyward Sword have strong positives. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed the more puzzle platformy version of Link and how active the dungeons and overworld were. There were a ton of really tricky puzzles and some fun new items that I'd love to see reworked for other games. The visuals looked quite nice in places, and there were scenarios and story beats that were really cool to experience basically completely fresh. Bonnaroo Desert fucking exists. There are definitely reasons to play this game. There are also definitely reasons to not play this game, and by the end, they kind of ended up dominating my mental Skyward Sword bubble. The sky is dog shit, the level design on the surface is fine, but the revisits make them stale, except for the desert, obviously. The motion controls are obnoxious, and the button-only controls aren't much better, and with how prone Switch controllers are to drift, you'll most likely end up having a rough time with either control scheme like I did. The attempts to have this be the kickoff point to the whole series are obtuse and even more embarrassing now that Nintendo already doesn't care about the timeline anymore. The story on its own has good elements like Zelda's characterization and the difference between the sky and the surface. I actually did kind of like the events that happened up in the sky, but it fails to do anything actually cool with them. Its few decent character moments are paced weird too, like Groos's arc, and I'd even lump in Girahim with him. That's all without mentioning straight up botched annoying characters like Fi, Impa, and Scrapper. And the overall linearity of the game in both parts makes this an exhausting playthrough. The two main comparisons I've made a bunch in both parts of this review are to the Wind Waker and Mario Galaxy. Wind Waker for some general aesthetic comparisons and the island-based overworld, and Mario Galaxy for the linear level design that's very platformy and full of little variety-packed vignettes. Both of those games are way better than this one. Wind Waker's ocean certainly wasn't perfect, but it was more appealing than the sky, with better looks and music music, and it had more things to do in it than the Sky does. And Mario Galaxy was way better at little bursts of variety on a linear track. In part 4 of this retrospective thing, I did an extensive comparison between Twilight Princess and the previous 3 3D Zelda games. But even with all my negative comparisons, I still came out of that review feeling relatively positive towards Twilight Princess. I feel even more positive about that game after doing this vid. By the time the credits shot a big orchestral sting at me, I was incredibly tired by all the bad aspects of Skyward Sword. If this was a standalone action-adventure game, I think people would like it a lot more. I feel like I definitely would. You could argue that between this game, Breath of the Wild, and the Link's Awakening remake, this game has more of a niche to fill on the Switch anyway, but with rumors of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD coming to the console basically always on the horizon, there's only so much time before this game becomes insanely mid again. It's definitely one of the weaker entries out of the whole series for me. In fact, I'd go as far as to say I have difficulties even empathizing with people who claim this is one of their favorites. That's how draining playing this game was to me. None of the other games were perfect by any stretch, but they were far more likable, fun, and emotionally impactful than Skyward Sword was for me, and making the actual video wasn't even that fun this go around. Normally I hyper focus on whatever video I'm writing and editing, but here the executive dysfunction was so awful, which was a big reason that this video took forever to come out and why it even got split in the first place. I just can't be passionate to work on something about something I have no passion for. Wait, nobody cares about me. If this was 2011, maybe I would be a bit nicer to the overall approach of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, but I would probably be worried about the future of Zelda. As we all know at this point though, in 2022, after 2011 the series would immediately pivot and continue to have great critical and financial success. A Link Between Worlds reused the general overworld from A Link to the Past, but created a structure where you could do chunks of dungeons in the order that you choose. And then Breath of the Wild threw a ton of stuff out the window and basically just reinvented what 3D Zelda even is. So basically, Nintendo had an experience that kind of got fumbled, but at the end of the day, we all know they're gonna watch Zelda's back and make sure it stays great. The series has the pedigree it does for a reason after all. So this brings to a close my retrospective on what I call classic 3D Zelda. This was by far the biggest and toughest project I've taken on for the channel. It ended up taking like a year and a half because of real life stuff. It was cool to play all these games within somewhat rapid succession of each other and see what changed between each of them, but listen, I'll always love this franchise, and I'm so hyped for Tears of the Kingdom, you have no idea. But at this exact moment, I'm even more hyped to not touch Zelda for a few months. I'm gonna focus on other channel endeavors and personal projects until that point. So I hope you look forward to whatever I'm doing next. But for all of you who stuck with me through this retrospective series and the format change and all of that, and watched any portion of my videos, even if you aren't hearing these words directly because you didn't watch the whole thing, thank you so much. It's nice to have a voice, and it feels even better for that voice to be heard. I'll see you in the next vid. Have a nice holiday.